We've got a large crowd, which is awesome. Um, we are going to be taking a look at the framework. So that was sent out to all of you last week, along with the technical notes. We're not going to be discussing the technical notes unless you have any specific questions. You can bring that up with your facilitator. So I just want to give you a quick overview of how today is going to go. We do have a very full agenda. We're going to start off with Jennifer Stafford talking about several of the components on the framework. And then we're going to break out into groups, and you will have a facilitator and a scribe in your group, and it's your opportunity to give us any feedback that you have on where we stand with the framework today. We'll then come back together. I think we're going to be in breakouts for that first breakout for about 20 minutes. We'll come back together, and facilitators or anyone who chooses from each group can do a share out. And then Jennifer will talk about the second half of the framework. We'll then go back into another breakout. That one will be 30 minutes long, I believe. And then we will come back together, do another share out, and then just do some wrap up at the end. All right. So that's how the days, guys. Pretty simple, but a lot going on. So we want you to be really candid with your feedback. We want to get this right. So please do share your thoughts with your facilitators once we get into those breakouts. All right. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Karen, and good morning, everyone. Thanks to our members for taking the time to provide input, and our partners for being here to continue the good work and support of Kentucky and a reimagined accountability system that includes assessments. As you recall, in October, we met and convened to review the feedback that we had had on the prototypes of 4.0. So we're making the progression from prototypes to a framework today. We've had several types of studies that you reviewed during that October meeting. We had the surveys, we had the 36 districts, we had the responses from that. All of that was considered and discussed around that prototype 4.0. So taking that feedback from you during that convening and developing the framework in this document shared with you on Friday. I hope you had the opportunity to review it over the last couple days. But we're really looking toward the different areas within the framework, and we want to talk about those today. The moonshot, as you recall, we're going to talk more about the core values and the reimagined assessment accountability system within the framework, the supports and local assurances, and then some phases to build upon with developing a local accountability system, and then also some competency-based assessments, and then looking at local and federal assessments. So Susan, if you'll go to the next slide. We all know the moonshot is to, in the vision, to build a prosperous Kentucky. We will launch an accountability system that is meaningful and useful to our learners. So that's our guiding post. That's our light that we want, that we're aiming toward, is that moonshot. So the next slide has, again, that timeline that we're looking for legislation in that 2026 legislative session. So a year from this coming January, looking at proposals and consideration of the General Assembly for changes in our current state statutes. So looking at the next slide, then we've got, we talk about, as part of the framework, the core values that was within the system. So to achieve that moonshot and ensure that sustainability, we really thought through what we heard relative to the different sections of the prototypes and how they approach to the framework. So the first theme that of a future redesigned system is about trust and empowerment. Trusting between local districts and their communities, the department and the legislature, and all of those, building those trust in our local education systems. Now, in Kentucky, we did have this past election a real boost to our public education system with the result of Amendment 2. And so it really shows that our communities trust our local education system. So we want to continue to build on that together at all levels of the education system and continue that building trust and the collaboration with our communities. So building on the innovations that are currently happening in Kentucky and developing and implementing those rich, robust local accountability systems and accountability systems that value those local priorities. The second theme is about connecting to grow and really trying to reduce the comparison and reduce the focus on the ranking where districts and schools may see themselves as competing against each other, but really bringing together the critical role of supporting districts in meaningful ways and learning from each other. So connecting districts who have similar demographics, similar students, both in their student population or maybe geographic location, connecting them and empowering them to learn from each other and to lift each other up and share resources that could impact what another district is doing so that they learn good practices from each other and maybe learn what not to do, because we've got districts in this local process now that have learned and share those learnings across local districts as they develop their local accountability systems that reflect and reinforce those very meaningful education experiences for all of our students. So theme 3 is flexibility, comparability, and confidence. So with the reimagined assessment system and accountability program, looking toward streamlining the federal system that we're moving towards streamlining. Now, it's not reducing it to the minimum. We talked about that in October, but we're actually streamlining the federal so that there's not a focus on the federal, but actually lifting up the local accountability and having that and having the space for our local districts to celebrate the good things that's happening within the local districts, giving districts the local autonomy and flexibility. And that's the key for our districts and schools to be able to connect with their local community instead of having the strict comparison that we would have to do to meet current federal laws, then having that flexibility that our schools and districts could choose what they want to focus on and lift up in their local accountability system. Whereas with the state, they would have that limitations with the federal. So we're really trying to balance that comparison with lifting up the local priorities and giving space to the local districts to celebrate and focus on what's meaningful and useful to each of our districts. So if we'll move on then to the next one is our KDE supports. And looking at being able to provide supports in different ways. And I mentioned that those networks of peer support where the state could help foster that collaboration and working with across districts, looking at maybe a process where districts showcase to each other their local accountability systems, and they are in conversations with other districts leaders from other districts that they're sharing those insights and looking at critically how their students and the process are happening and giving feedback to each other and really providing that support to each other. Some state tools would be that the school report card would continue providing information from the federal required elements that are required for reporting, but linking to that local district accountability system and placing that those local systems alongside of the federal system and showcase so that the districts can showcase and provide a platform to tell their own stories and create their own platforms to be able to provide information around their local accountability systems. And then again, that external feedback, providing a system that every 3 years, a district would have an external evaluator come and review the processes, the collaborations with local community members, and identifying best practices and providing feedback for continuous improvement. As far as local assurances, making sure that the communities, our local leaders are involved extensively and engaged in the conversations with the district and their leaders, and having that transparent process where our business community, our religious community, our healthcare providers, all of the resources that we have within our local districts are included, and bringing in families and parents, caregivers, students into the process. Again, we talked about the public display of accountability, of that local accountability, providing information aligned to those local priorities that the community has identified, and providing areas that enrich data that the district community members would want to, and in place of reducing or eliminating that color rating that we currently have that is in the current system. And then finally, having disaggregated data in the local accountability system so that we can see or the communities can see how it's impacting all of our students and our student demographic groups. The next slide shows be done. A local accountability system or competency-based assessments cannot be completed just overnight. We can't just say, okay, go forth and create your own local accountability system or move forward with your performance-based assessments. That it needs to be phased in. We have districts currently creating their own local accountability systems, continuing with that piloting, and bringing in other schools or districts that could learn from the local labs of learning, and helping them design and implement the local accountability system so that there are ways of growing in training, professional development around those key components of developing local accountability system. And sharing those best practices so that other districts may not encounter all the challenges that our districts that have been on the forefront have met. Then expanding and scaling, taking the learning from that pilot, from the local labs of learning, that pilot phase into and expanding to other districts across the state, and providing, again, more support in development of that local accountability system. And then the next phase would then be the full implementation. And now, again, this phased-in approach could also work toward our competency-based or performance assessments as well. So looking at that. So that's a high-level overview of the first really the first page of the framework. And we're going now, as Karen said, we're going to go into some small group discussions. Our facilitators are going to have a discussion just about these components. So just about the core values, the assurances, the supports, around those local accountability systems or the framework for a reimagined system, and then those phases. So that's the focus of the first discussion. We have about 20 minutes for that. Then the next phase or the next discussion will be around those accountability elements and the assessment components that we have. So first discussion is about just the information presented, and then we'll come back to talk more in depth about those accountability elements.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, we're going to get ready for the breakout. We're a little over time right now, so we're going to try a 15-minute breakout for this first one. Got that, facilitators? Thumbs up? Yeah, okay. And I think it'll kick you back into this room. Susan, if you would like to open up the rooms, I think everybody will automatically go to a room. So we will go ahead and turn it over to, I think you can hide that screen for right now, Susan, because we're just going to go into the share outs. Thank you. So facilitators, if you want to share out, we'll just start with group 1 and go down through group 5. So if you or someone from your group wants to share out, floor is all yours.
I think you might have to tell us what our group numbers were. I just got whisked away to a group and I have no idea what number my group number is.
I'm quickly scanning. Gretchen, you're 3. No, wait, just
Excellent.
kidding.
Oh,
yes, you're 3.
Cool.
And Susan Lyons, I'll turn it over to you to facilitate the share outs.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think you kicked us off in the right direction there, Sharon. So we'll just go top to bottom and from the group numbers. If Laura, if you have the group numbers handy and could just call on the facilitator, that might be helpful.
Happy to do that.
Okay,
yeah, so
that'd
group
be great.
1 is Andre and Kathy. Andre was our facilitator for that group.
All right. Yeah. Good. Hello, everybody. There were 2 really main threads of our conversation. So one had to do about the being more explicit about the relative configuration of what more stable long-term statewide priorities and system components are, and what the local flexibilities are that interact with that system in order to make sure that people feel like they have sort of anchors, I would call that, to hang their thinking and their strategic planning on. And there was also, in relation to that, this comment that it would be important to look for opportunities to signal back to the feds at some point the sort of the successes that this system has, and seeing whether there might be any changes at the federal policy level that could be made that would support such a system in the long term. And the other part was about making connections between the portrait of a learner and graduate, specifically making sure that it gets that the thinking around the portrait of a learner and the implementation parts of that get considered throughout the K through 12 span, and that the earlier grades in particular, number one, don't get lost in that. Number two, I would say that the language is also student friendly, that perspective isn't forgotten. And I would say the connection we were just starting to make at the end is sort of what that then means for different pieces of this system. And one piece is there's implications for making sure that the assessment systems are properly configured and locally there's enough freedom to do so. It also has implications for the resources that are being provided at the state level to the local districts, and making sure the local districts share information across the grade span, specifically the marker grades. And I think the system does have I would say flexibilities for things like allowing locally defenses of learning, for example, at transitional grades to take place and those to be incorporated. So I think that's actually one feature that the current plan has that already speaks to the fact that these sort of that continuous progression can be captured. Tracy, I put the last thing, I put a few words in your mouth if you want to add anything to that. Yeah, okay, so then I would stop there.
Thank you, Andre. Yeah, that's really helpful. That it sounds like a rich discussion. We'll move into the other groups, but if anybody heard something similar to what group 1 was discussing, if you could sort of reference back to that and build on it or add nuance, that'd be helpful. So John, we'll go to you next.
So our group talked a bit more in depth about a lot of the district implementation questions. So thinking about things like, how are we going to make sure that folks don't just see this as another this too shall pass type of initiative? One comment focused around the importance of making sure that this is actually enshrined in statute in some meaningful way, so that folks understand that this is a meaningful change. Thinking too about questions around costing, what kind of models are people going to have to build off of this, making sure that people have reasonable runway to start getting engaged in this work if they haven't been involved in it already. And then also the supports for implementation, so that folks understand how to do this and they have the supports that they need to actually go through and create meaningful local systems. Anyone else from my group want to chime in on anything?
Thank you, John. Yeah, that theme about district implementation came up in our group. Travis, you were talking about sort of the expense that your district and others have gone through in creating the local dashboards and making them beautiful and interpretable and simple enough. And right, so there's a lot of work that goes into that and figuring out what kinds of supports might the state be offering in terms of a list of partners, or maybe at the collaborative they could do networked learning around developing data displays. And so I think in particular it's sort of resource intensive, and there's a lot of professional capacity that goes into building those dashboards and the indicators and all of it that goes into it. So thank you, John. We'll move on to group 3. Karen Perry.
Yeah, we had a conversation in our room around really kind of, is there a desire to, there's elements of comparability that are still conveying pretty clearly in this that may not be intended. And so we had a whole conversation about what is loose and what is tight for the local districts. We talked about, is comparability really a goal here? And if so, we make a different set of decisions based on that. We did talk about a suggestion coming for the proposal moving forward to articulate really in a really clear way what is current state versus what is the future state, and maybe like a table or something where people could just easily get a look at, here's what the current system is now, here's what would be different moving forward. There was Also some discussion about the external evaluators. I know we'll get a little bit more into detail about this later, but who are those people? What is the process? What have been the historical concerns about accreditation processes? How onerous they are versus how valuable they are. There was a recommendation to make sure that whoever's on those external committees are vetted, closely vetted, so that that's another element of being trustworthy in our approach here, not just, kind of friendly, critical friends around external decisions. And if I'm missing anything, I was trying to be quick. If I'm missing anything, group 3, let me know. Or Gretchen, did I miss anything?
You got a thumbs up from James.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, Karen. I think certainly that external evaluator question came up in our group as well. And I was hearing too, Kathy Stovall, I think you had the idea of when we're going out to talk with communities, when the commissioner is hosting his town halls, it would really be helpful to have that side by side, simple. Here's where the current state, here's the future state. So that's a fantastic communication tool to bring people into this work that haven't been involved previously. So in terms of our group, we heard a lot of endorsement for the way this is framed around collaboration, moving away from the competition element. That comes through in the way this is framed up. So that's really positive feedback. We heard from Joel, our educator representative, to make sure that when we're doing the networks of peers, that educators are at the table. It's not just district and superintendents and admins liaison, but really creating opportunities for educators to be learning from one another in these networks of peers. Travis mentioned the data display and the need for support around that, but also what might be missing from the current vision is sort of, in a prior prototype version, we had mentioned that all of this effort was in service of eventually moving to a fully performance-based assessment model. And he wasn't seeing that coming through in this framework. And so it's just a question, is that still the goal? If it is, let's put it on the table and make sure that it's in the framework. Travis, is there anything I missed from what you've said there?
No, it just appears to be a missing component on the building local accountability in phases, pilot, scale, and sustain. There seems to be a missing, maybe 4th component to that.
Okay.
That would address those things that you just mentioned.
Thank you. Others from group 4? Anything I might have missed in our discussion? Okay, we'll turn it over to Laura from group 5.
Hi, everybody. I'll try to keep it fairly brief since we're the last group and we were small but mighty. Generally, feedback was positive in the transition to this sort of framework presentation and around the values and the assurances. There was some discussion also in our group, so I'll kind of +1 the topic around what is the place of comparability in this system? And perhaps a little bit of misunderstanding about, like, does comparability automatically mean that color rating system? We thought that was going away. So I think seeking some clarity around the role of comparability in the system. There is, and then there was some great discussion about what does community and family engagement look like, and really wanting to lean into that family piece, really wanting to build on funds of knowledge beyond just sort of like local priorities. So really kind of looking at, like, what are our funds of knowledge that we're building from, and what do those mean about what we prioritize in our local communities? So really wanting to lean into the sort of family space around engagement. And that connects also to the state support of kind of peer support, also thinking about the state's role in facilitating school and community interactions beyond just school to school interactions.
Thank you. It sounds like a lot of really positive and productive conversations about how to make this framework. It's almost like this framework needs to be a 50-page document now to sort of walk through how are these things going to work, or how might they work, based on the richness of this conversation. So thank you. Karen, how are we doing on time?
We are doing good. Jennifer's going to have to open up for the next one, but we've got, as long as we're in the next breakout by 10 o'clock, we can give everybody a half hour for that breakout.
It looks like, Travis, you've got one comment before we switch back to Jennifer.
Yeah, I guess I just heard a couple of times raise that idea of comparability. Could somebody speak to that maybe for just a moment? I guess I may have missed something where that was maybe elaborated upon. We didn't really get into that in our breakout room. So could someone maybe enlighten me just a little bit about that conversation?
Laura, do you want to jump in on that?
Sure. Yeah. So the reason that I think that's a great question, and so I'll try to articulate why comparability is a word that is lifted up in this framework, is that after the October meeting, what we heard was that there was sort of a range of data that folks were interested in having in part of the system. Some of those data, and we know we really want to lean into and prioritize, are locally identified measures of learning and engagement and opportunities for students. To the extent that those data are locally defined, they are going to be less comparable, and that is okay. At the same time, we also know that there are going to be data in this overarching system of assessment and accountability that will be more comparable because they're required for everybody, like statewide assessments. And the extent to which that those measures are comparable, that was identified as a point of, we heard, identified as a point of value. This is very distinct from saying we want to have a color rating system and we're trying to have some single score for schools, but rather to say we recognize the value of having some shared checkpoints that we can look at alongside these local, more flexible, but less comparable measures. So that was sort of, we were trying to articulate this spectrum. And so maybe we could do a better job with wording, or a better job with trying to frame up that sort of balancing act in that range. Or maybe you all might say, get comparability out of there, folks. We understand that's a part of it, but we don't want to lift that up as a value. So that's why it's there.
Well, thank you. I see that, in terms of a core value, and we didn't talk about that. So I certainly appreciate, thank you for bringing that forward. I think my question that is rolling over in my head about that in particular, as it relates to local accountability, I feel like local accountability in theory, in essence, right, of what it is locally defined. And if it is locally defined, it feels to me like that makes those components, they would not necessarily have comparability, right? I mean, certainly I am in favor of the external feedback and the peer reviews that help make us better at those outcomes we desire to meet. But when we do try to force comparability in a local system, it appears to me to lose some of that. So I appreciate the elaboration, and that was just what was rolling over in my head.
Yeah, and so maybe as you guys have thoughts, and you could put your notes into that note capture document, if you have any suggestions for how we could make clear that we aren't trying to force comparability in the local system, but we're trying to think about the sort of, we talked about is like a control panel of data, so what data do you have available to you? And some of it's comparable and some of it's less comparable.
Certainly. And one of the things that raises for me, right, that I think we will talk about is the quality of school climate survey that's being mandated in the proposal across all local systems, right? So for sure, that is a comparability component, and feels to not feel local when we are mandated to give that particular quality of school climate survey. And I'm sure we'll talk
Travis,
about that.
I think that's a great lead in to Jennifer's part 2 of this, to actually go into, okay, what are the component pieces of that we're proposing in this framework? So Jennifer, we'll turn it back to you, and then there's lots to discuss there, Travis, as you point out.
So thanks. And that with the comparability, we're just opening the door to say it's okay not to have that comparability across. And so that's we're lifting that up is that it's acceptable that our local accountability systems are not comparable. They're not going to have the same priorities in one district that they have in another, and that's good. So that's where we're at. So I have about 8 minutes here to talk about these local those accountability elements. So try to do that in as much detail as possible, but we really want to hear your feedback on these local and accountability elements. Kudos to the team that put together the framework and the nice graphics. This one is a really good display of how the local and the federal kind of work together. Noting that the federal is at current legislation requires multiple indicators around specifically reading and math. We've discussed multiple times about individual student growth and moving away from that change element that's in our current system, continuing with progress toward English language proficiency, which is a requirement. Another academic indicator of science performance at all levels, and then at the high school level, having the transition ready along with graduation rate. Now, that is, again, more streamlined approach to the federal accountability, and really trying to give space for that local accountability, that schools and districts can have that local decision making within these different elements. Beginning with then the choices of having their own performance-based assessments or a state offered assessment, especially in writing and social studies. The focus here is around providing vibrant learning experiences and understanding that districts are in different places along the spectrum of being able to offer vibrant learning experiences. And so giving the autonomy to say what the component is that they are offering around a menu of options. We've had several come out of our work group, whether that is capstone projects, defenses of learning, or so forth, and also whether it is percentages to begin with, or if it's a quality of those vibrant learning experiences. Having again, the quality of school climate and safety survey that is offered by the state and reported by the state, the opportunity to have that in the local accountability system, along with a through year formative interim assessments that would provide information to the local districts that they could then include in their local accountability system. And then again, other components that are, again, at the discretion of the local district or school. If we'll move to the next one, you'll notice that for the assessments, there are options within the school and district, whether they have their own performance-based, competency-based local measures, or whether they utilize the state provided. Notice that there are, for social studies and writing, grades 3 through 10. So the value of social studies and writing has not gone away. Actually, it's expanded for the multiple grade levels, just moving that out of the current state assessment and state accountability system. And then again, we've talked about those vibrant learning experiences. If we'll go to the next slide, offering the quality of school climate and safety survey that we heard is important to have our students' voice within our system, as well as having knowing that they have a sense of belonging and connection and they feel safe at their school. So continuing with valuing those within our local schools and districts. And then the interim assessments, those assessments would cover, and for reading and math, grades 3 through 10 that would again be included at grade 9. And so that's a bit of difference. Whereas that could be utilized for local accountability purposes. And then the identifying additional components that the district engaging with partnerships around their communities, families, and other stakeholders would then identify. As for federal, we've again tried to streamline that. Reading and math, offering through year adaptive assessments for reading and math, where only the spring administration summative assessment would be utilized for that federal accountability piece. Now, the discussion here is that there would be around that summative some formative adaptive pieces around that in that spring administration that is continuing within the spring discussion. Individual student growth, we've talked about that. That was the most agreed upon element of our accountability system. Then the no change to the progress on toward English language proficiency, nor the transition readiness or the graduation rate. So those three pieces would remain unchanged. Susan, if you go to the next slide. Then for science, note here that the state in the current discussion would offer optional tests in all grades, 3 through 10. So the optional test would be at 3, 4, 6, 7, and 9, demonstrating that, again, that science is important, that students at all grade levels should be receiving instruction around science instead of only the tested grades. And then moving the state required assessments to 5, 8, and 10 with the reduction of the state test from social studies and writing, that frees up some time at 5, 8, and 10 to take those assessments, the science assessments at those grade levels. And then where the comparability comes in is when we're identifying for our federal classifications for comprehensive support and improvement, targeted support and improvement, and then that additional. So that's where these elements of the federal assessment would be comparable. They would be common across all schools and districts so that we would be able to identify the schools for those improvement efforts. Okay, that was a lot. We're going to transition, and I'm over to Karen, 1 minute.
You're fine. You're good.
Okay, so I'll let you transition us to small group discussions.
Yep. Susan, when you're ready, let's put 30 minutes into those breakouts and we'll go ahead and move everyone over.
So welcome back. Karen, can you remind us how much time we have for these share outs?
You got about 20 minutes.
Okay, awesome. So I know there was a lot to discuss and unpack, so we're just going to jump right to it. And we'll start with group 5 this time and just go in the opposite order to mix it up. So Laura, do you want to share?
Literally
or
jumped.
anyone in your group?
Great. Okay. So as I'm organizing my thoughts here, we had a really great discussion and lots of candid and really thoughtful feedback. So I just want to thank the folks in our group for that. So a lot of our discussion centered around a theme of how this framework is communicated going forward. So, we're lucky that you all have been a part of these conversations for years. You have a lot of background. You kind of know how we got here, even if you have some questions. But a lot of folks, especially as we continue down the path of sharing these in town halls and in other discussions, are going to be reacting to kind of what they scan in a fairly simplified document. And so that's sort of the theme. So then there came some specific suggestions out of that. One point of suggestion was it'd be very easy for someone to look at this and think, holy moly, this is a lot of testing. And oh, we're going back to these portfolio systems. And maybe I don't have good thoughts about that, or I have, I've heard things. And so there's sort of negative connotations. And so to that point, and to perhaps mitigate that reaction, folks were saying, well, maybe we really want to think about how we make very clear, again, this echoes the earlier conversation, current state and future state, and really help folks see what both the picture of the kind of assessment, the balanced assessment landscape in the future, and where things would be going away to get to a space that allows for more competency-based and performance-based practices. The related part of that then leans into, and it applies both as we look at assessment practices as well as some of the other measures like the quality of school climate and safety survey, is kind of leaning into and making very clear where there is a requirement around something and where there's local discretion within that requirement or outside of the requirement. So for example, if what we're saying here is, vibrant learning has to be measured in your local system, you can choose how you do that. That's a requirement, but a choice within the requirement. That's different than saying there's going to be the quality of school climate and safety survey. You all know that that's going to continue to be administered. It's just not going to be a part of the federal classification system anymore. We're going to report it. That's a different kind of requirement. And then there's outside of those lanes of requirements, there's a scenario in which you can also define locally what other kinds of measures are going to be important to you to support your continuous improvement and reflect your local values. And so that's outside of the kind of requirement sphere. So we were really kind of discussing how to make clear and just acknowledging a requirement is a requirement to folks. They don't really care where it comes from. So we just have to make clear where there are decision points and where there are requirements relative to those. Carrie and Brooke, I hope that captured things.
Thank you, Laura. I think that effort to communicate what exists versus what is proposed here, we heard that loud and clear in our group, but I'll start just sort of more generally and try and capture the sentiment in my room. Please, if I get it wrong, to my group members, correct me. I think there's a general sense of, just upon seeing this, a sense of frustration, a sense that my voice, our voices, the will of the council isn't being heard. And I think there's some specific, we've tried to sort of figure out what is that specifically that's sort of triggering that overall reaction to this framework. And I think one of the specific things that rose to the top was the inclusion of science. Many of the members in my room were like, where did that come from? That wasn't part of our discussions at the council meeting, at the last meeting. And so at least the folks in my room were thinking, or were proposing, that science just stay where it is. Yes, it's required federally. Yes, we need to assess it. We'll keep doing that and reporting it, but taking it out of federal accountability. Equal desire to keep that school quality and school climate in the federal accountability system. That was a recommendation from my group to sort of keep those two pieces where they currently exist in the current system. And another recommendation was to think about opportunities to push that science assessment more towards performance-based assessment systems. So what possibilities exist there, either for local capacity building opportunities, or through the current state assessment system? How can we think about more performance-based approaches to science? And then in general, Laura, it sounds like a similar conversation in your room about like, whoa, this just looks like a lot of more requirements than we previously had. And is that what we actually want? Right. And so I think though we heard a desire for vibrant learning experiences to be lifted up and prioritized, we heard a desire for through year formative assessment or interim assessment opportunities. When you're seeing it on paper, I think there were mixed reactions in room as like, is this actually the direction we want to go, where we're actually adding on these additional requirements to the local systems? I think some of the voices I heard in my room were like, yes, we do want those guardrails. Yes, we do want those priorities. And then others were saying, whoa, no, this isn't going to really fly. Are there are there folks in my room that want to amend or correct anything that I've said? Okay.
I just think one comment, I may not, Holly and some others in the room may be able to echo this as well, but I don't remember how it was said exactly, but this doesn't seem like what we set out to accomplish on day one as it relates to our moonshot. It doesn't seem like it's truly this reimagined system. I may not be communicating that correctly, but I definitely thought I heard that theme come up.
Thank you, Travis, for adding that. All right, we'll move to Karen, your group.
It sounds like we had some really similar conversations to what happened in your room, Susan. We started really by talking about comparability again. I think that's we're focused on that because it really raises this issue about what's loose and what's tight. What are we actually mandating and requiring versus what's locally optional? And if we're gonna move things to locally optional, how do we assure trustworthiness of those systems and what it's really saying? I don't think came to, and we can spend our next time just getting clear on this a little bit, but I don't think we came to final 100% agreement on the science test versus this climate test, but we had a similar conversation saying that climate survey is extremely valued by a number of stakeholders. We heard it clearly in the room. We've heard it clearly throughout our other conversations. So moving that to locally optional and just felt like maybe we weren't valuing at the level that we've heard from stakeholders. A similar conversation to what you heard about science. Why are we doing that in our room? We talked also in our room about getting clear about the through-year assessment being diagnostic versus grade level. So if the decision is that we're going to have a through-year assessment and that third administration is going to be both diagnostic and grade level, just clearly communicating that so people really understand how that's different than what we currently have happening. Looking back through our notes, lots on comparability. What are the elements that were actually going to be used to inform the comparable the elements that have to be included in comparability? We had a good conversation about vibrant learning that I'd like to raise, which is we care both about the percentage of students who are participating in vibrant learning experiences and the outcomes that come from it. So we have to know that vibrant learning is accessible to all kids as a regular course of their learning experience, but also that that's high quality and the outcomes are what we want them to be. So really both of those things being really important. The other thing we talked about was having a really clear set of success criteria around vibrant learning. Although the evidence can be different from district to district, but the definition of success around that needs to be consistent statewide. So it would be in keeping of a competency-based system, clear success criteria with evidence being varied from district to district. But both things are important to us. Room 3, am I forgetting anything?
Yeah, I'm noticing this common theme, Karen and Laura, from what's been shared so far is like, really, what is it that's required? Where do we want full local autonomy? And I don't know, like, I think we're sort of we have different opinions about that. It's not a consistent message from the KUWL Council about like, oh yes, we must be really tight on this versus we can be fully loose on this. And I think that's where we're getting into these details now. And we didn't get it quite right probably in this framework and sort of figuring out how to tweak in response to these conversations. We'll move to room 2, John.
Great, thanks, Susan. I will just re-up the conversation about the science assessment that also came up. Folks were just wondering how that had come about. We did refresh folks' memories that essentially because we swapped out the school climate survey, we had to swap something else in. I think the concern that was expressed in the room is that science performance is not something that's even across the state. And so that could produce some potential pushback just purely because it's another performative measure. So something that could throw folks off. We also, similarly to some of these concerns you expressed, there was some discussion about the comparability of the broader education experience across the state. Some conversations about are the required federal indicators, which would be common across the state, enough to create that balance with the local indicators. And feel free to contradict me. I don't know that we came to a resolution on that, but I think that's just a healthy tension point to acknowledge of what's the right balance for that comparability. We also had some conversations about ensuring that for those local measures where there's a quality assurance piece, that there is some oversight to make sure that folks are indeed having the oversight they need to make sure things are of good quality. And as a really quick wind up, everybody was still on board with getting rid of the color systems. That was one area of consensus in our room. Room 2, anything else, Donnie or others, that I may have missed or misrepresented?
I think the one thing that I also appreciated about the conversation was that the idea of the staged approach to introducing the VLE indicator, like thinking about access first, then sort of layering on additional sort of detail onto that over time as a developmental way of doing that. And it was also a little bit of a conversation around like, how do we encourage people to do things just because it's sort of good and valuable, as opposed to using like accountability as sort of a hammer, like how do we get people to sort of rally around things like VLE?
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like a really rich discussion in the theme of what we've been hearing, right? It's like if we're shifting the culture of accountability in service of our moonshot, we want to have shared assurances and shared goals and guardrails at the state level to some extent. But it's where do we get tight on those requirements and where do we lay off? It's the challenge. So Andre, we'll turn it over to you for your group.
Hey, what you all said, I'm just going to say this. We had very similar conversations to Logically. We focus a lot on science, not exclusively. I think what maybe a flavor that I want to highlight is, so with this idea of like how to configure federal or state mandated options for assessment, the inclusion of federal accountability into the system, yes or no, and local options. A lot of this comes down to values, right? And design features that we want the system to have so that it is, to your point, Susan, what you just said, so that at the end, the overall system is meaningful and useful for learners. So there was this idea, we talked a lot about different sort of design options and what that means for signaling and what impacts that would have on maybe changes to professional development practices for teachers, and how, for example, if you could allow more, had a through-course system with performance-based assessment components, even you had something like that in science, and you would encourage teachers then throughout the year to really lean into the most innovative standards aligned practices, while also in parallel at some grades having a really trustworthy instrument that connects. But it would sort of, you really want to affect the culture of learning, and to Donnie's point, is this access two opportunities for rich learning. And so going back to saying, like, what do we really mean when we say it's meaningful, it's useful, we wanted something that's innovative? What are the systemic implications of making these design choices at the system level for all of these other things that make schooling work? To me, that's sort of what came through in our conversation. I will say I did see that, Jim, you put a few additional comments in that had to do with transition readiness and other indicators after we close. Do you want to speak to any of those?
Oh, I just wanted to advocate that we have some mechanism for districts that come up with some innovative options for transition readiness, to have a mechanism that those could be included. And then we've had this discussion about the ACT. Right now we do ACT for all. I advocate that it would be an option provided by the state for those students who want it and think it's meaningful and useful to them. But those other students that are pursuing alternative transition readiness pathways would not be required, because I think it runs counter to our moonshot.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that really deep, thoughtful, candid feedback on the framework. I'll turn it to you, Karen, to talk about next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, everyone. Susan, do we have a final slide? Thank you. All right, so on the note catcher that you all have been working in, I believe all the facilitators shared that document with your participants, I'm hoping, because we'd like you to go into that document. And there's just a couple questions on there. First of all, how confident are you in understanding the current framework on a scale of 1 to 5? And what would it take to increase your rating? I think we know that this is not ready for your endorsement yet. But if you've already given that feedback, if it's already listed in there from all the two breakouts that we've had, then we're good. But if you feel like there's something that hasn't been captured, then please do go in there and let us know what it would take to increase your rating, assuming that it's under 5.
Karen, sorry, a quick anchoring question. I know we have,
Sure.
So like confidence, for me, it would mean, for example, if I'm highly confident, I would feel, for example, at this point that I would be able to explain the framework to a colleague. And I would feel I can do this. I can explain all the key elements and the foundational drivers and all of that, given the way it is currently envisioned. Would you say that's a fair description?
I think that's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks
So
for
maybe
that
then, if
clarification.
that helps anybody to sort of have that as an anchor for what the confidence rating means, maybe that's
Thanks, Andre.
Yeah.
So next steps, we have LSAC, so the local superintendent legislative superintendent advisory council is meeting on the 26th, and then the board meeting is December 4th, and we'll be sharing this framework with all of them at those meetings. We have town halls that are scheduled in January. So we are going to, and Dr. Fletcher is going to be leading all of these town halls. So meeting with each of the co-ops and getting folks in from those regions. So we're hoping to bring in more teachers, more students, more business people, all of our different stakeholder groups into these town hall meetings at the regional co-op offices or wherever they are able to hold that for us. So we are in the process of working on that, what that's going to look like. And then we would like to bring all of you back together on February 3rd. So mark your calendar. This is the first you're hearing about it, I know. But we have a very short time frame between finishing up those town halls, because our last one is scheduled for January 30th. And then we need to give an update to the board on February 4th. So on February 3rd, we'd like to bring you all back together and give you the feedback that we've heard from all of those town halls. Let's see, what else?
Aaron,
Yeah.
one additional meeting is this afternoon. We have the other half of our KUWL Council members giving feedback. So this is about half of the members here, and then we'll hear from the other half this afternoon.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Laura. Yes, the February meeting would be virtual, so just like this one. And we would probably do 2 again, because it does seem like, you know, some folks prefer to do it during work hours if you're able, and others prefer evening. So we'll probably do that again on February 3rd, but we'll keep you posted on that. Are there any questions, or does anyone else have anything they want to share? We've got 6 minutes left. Or Jennifer, if there's anything else you want to put out there before we, Travis, yes.
So will there be additional iterations of the document? And if so, when are those potentially being drafted? At what point in the feedback process? Just curious.
Jennifer, do you want to answer that?
Sure. This is a first draft. We're taking this into discussions here with the council members. We also have discussions, as Karen mentioned, with the local superintendent advisory council, as well as the board meeting, then into the town hall. So this is the first draft. We do anticipate that it'll change, and it'll change once it before any final legislation is considered. So lots in the process of development. So looking forward to continuing that iterative process.
Any other questions, thoughts, concerns? Making sure I give the appropriate amount of wait time here.
Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to provide feedback today. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to react to the framework.
Thanks for saying that, Travis. Well,
And
as
we
always,
appreciate, yeah, absolutely. That's what I was going to say too. I appreciate very much your critical review. I know that this is a complex conversation, ones that we will continue, and we really appreciate each and every one of you that's on this call, both our members and our partners. It's a good team to be a part of. So thank you all very much, and happy Thanksgiving if I don't see you before then.
thanks everyone.